Peter Singer is a famous modern philosopher, perhaps most famous for his work called Animal Liberation, in which he was an early and vocal proponent of veganism, because he believed that the boundary between human and animal was arbitrary, and discrimination and wholesale slaughter of animals was tantamount to speciesism, the idea that one species is superior to another. I read Animal Liberation in high school in an introductory class on philosophy. I was pretty invested in vegetarianism in high school, having lived and worked on a farm for a bit, having read and been radicalized by Fast Food Nation. So I was already primed to be deeply interested in what Singer had to say. There was one thing from those discussions of Singer's work that really stuck with me. An entire framing of the problem that I have never forgotten. Singer believed that one day we would look back on the eating and treatment of animals the way we currently look back on the institution of chattel slavery. This perspective absolutely blew my mind, and I carry it with me today. The idea that we should approach today's social justice issues with an eye towards how future generations will perceive us. In particular, what Singer got me thinking about was how chattel slavery, the literal dehumanization of other humans for profit, was a widely accepted institution. That it was considered a byproduct of our industrialized nation, a necessary system by which goods were produced and wealth flourished. There were many, many, many people who didn't give it a second thought. It was simply how things were and how things needed to be. And yet we tend to sit around today and moralize about folks back then. We tend to look at those generations with genuine wonder, bordering on disgust, as to how anyone could have lived with themselves knowing what we know today. We sit around baffled as anyone could have allowed it to occur, let alone participated in it, borne witness to it, without immediately joining up alongside John Brown. We forget that the vast majority of people are pretty content with the status quo. No matter the period in history, no matter the circumstances, most folks will just go along to get along. It is the righteous few who see things with a clarity that is lauded and celebrated later. It is the few and the often maligned that understand what is really at stake in systems that everyone else takes for granted. Most people, and this means us, we are most people, are pretty content to keep on keeping on without a lot of interrogation, without a lot of curiosity as to where the current wells of violence and injustice intersect with their lives and what they might be capable of doing. Tim DeChristopher, a UU climate activist who has served time in prison for his work, he wrote, "All that oppressors ask from us is to mind our own business." If we can sit around today in absolute confusion as to what our ancestors were thinking between the years 1619 and 1865, we can bet that future generations will do the same to us. So who among us will be counted as the righteous few? Who among us is willing to scream into the wind about the injustices of our day, knowing that they might be maligned, that they may be drowned out or alienated? It is lonely work. It is lonely and isolating work to perceive things with a moral clarity that is beyond reach for most others, and it's complicated. The complexity and difficulty of it all often leads us to forgiving those in our histories who didn't see things the same way we do now. Things were really different then. We can't apply the same expectations to those who lived then. But when I'm tempted to do that, because it is so tempting, when I'm tempted to explain away Thomas Jefferson's hypocrisy in writing the Declaration of Independence, in which all men are created equal, while raping a slave and producing children he would never see as fully human, When I'm tempted to make excuses for Theodore Roosevelt, who gave us national parks but believed that the only good Indians were dead Indians, I remember that there have always been the righteous few. There have always been people who saw things as they really were, who were able to transcend the moment of their time and knew in their bones what was right and what was wrong. No matter what the powerful and the educated said, no matter the cost to their reputation, there have always been people who had moral clarity and conviction. This is the legacy we want to inherit. Not of the apologists with the pragmatic approach, not the quiet complacence of the majority. That is not the legacy of Unitarian Universalism, and it's not the one we want to inherit. Because you can bet, wherever folks have rallied and railed against the status quo, wherever folks have taken time and dredged the courage to look at things critically and with a commitment to justice, wherever and whenever in the history books you might find these campaigns, you can bet there are Unitarians and Universalists in there. It is a great point of pride in our faith, for me personally and for our denomination. We have a rich and textured legacy of speaking out against the dominant culture at the time. It is a great point of pride that we have important and famous thinkers in our lineage who pointed out, look there. Look at this thing that we all do, this thing we all think is fine. It's not fine. It's not fine at all. I think of our very own Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who joined this congregation in 1870. Only a few years prior, she had mounted the platform at a women's rights convention in New York City to point out in a very public and important forum that she did not believe, quote, white women are dewdrops just exhaled from the skies. She laid out a clear case for why white women have used her and other African-American women to prop up their causes, whether it be abolition or temperance or the vote. But when it came down to it, Frances said, white women would never step up to defend her causes as she had theirs. In 1870, imagine how her hands might have trembled as she took to the stage. Imagine coming down after having delivered those words. And that's a fight that still happens to this day for us white women to do our part in supporting Black women in real and meaningful ways. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, she is the legacy we want to inherit. I think of Martha and Waitstill Sharp, who left the comfort of their home and their two small children in Wellesley, Massachusetts, where Waitstill was the minister at the Unitarian Church of Wellesley Hills. They left the comfort of their home to work in Europe, primarily in Marseille, France, and Lisbon, Portugal, to assist with getting refugees out of Nazi-occupied Europe to England and the US. Martha, in particular, worked tirelessly to secure visas and monies for Jewish political refugees and their children, often circumventing restrictions on Jewish immigration quotas that were in place in both the US and Europe. Martha and Waitstill flew into France in 1939, just after the fall of Paris. Take stock for a minute of the courage and conviction it would require to leave your established life, to leave your children, to head to war, not empowered by the call to action from the military, but to work essentially alone, without any infrastructure or government support, to ensure that lives were spared and that whomever they could save, they would work to save. We've often been told stories of bystanders from Nazi Germany who claimed they just didn't know the extent of the brutality, the extent of the violence and the extermination. And yet here were two ordinary Unitarians who could not shake their moral outrage that something was rotten over there, something that people looked the other way about. Here, they said something needed to be done. Never mind that it would never have touched their lives in Wellesley. This is the legacy we inherit. I think of Scott Warren and the volunteers out of the UU Church in Tucson, Arizona. Scott was indicted just a handful of years ago on felony charges for harboring fugitives when he went out into the desert to aid migrants. He bandaged their feet and gave them food and water. The work of No More Deaths out of the UU Church in Tucson is hard physical labor. The work that Scott was doing, requiring long trips into the arid and suffocating heat of the Arizona-Mexico border to drop water and supplies for the people, the very real beating hearts of people who want a chance at life in America and don't deserve to die for that. Their actions force us today in our air conditioning and in our northern homes to confront the ongoing humanitarian disaster at our borders, where children are ripped from families, where people are lost in the system. And we don't know much more than that. Scott and the work of the UU Church in Tucson, they say, look there, it's not fine there. It's not fine. This is the legacy we inherit. The thing we ought to remember is that for all of these folks, they didn't have widespread acclaim at the time. They didn't have celebrity or universal acceptance. They were often derided and marginalized. Sometimes they were silenced or mocked. Sometimes it has been only the passage of time that we begin to understand the value of their perspective. Only with the passage of time do we see the visionary courage which transcended the tenor of their times. Which begs the question, so what and who is that today? Who do we vilify and consider extreme the way Frances Ellen Watkins Harper might have been? What are the systems at play now that our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and our great-great-grandchildren, what will they encounter in their history books with horror like we do, the Holocaust? And knowing that none of us were Martha or Waitstill Sharp. What will they learn in their education that only a few brave souls spoke out? Like Scott Warren, will it be the prison system? Eating animals? Will it be medical debt? Climate change? Police? What do we see as institutions our society cannot survive without, and yet we must find a way to be rid of them? To be a conscientious objector in our world, and I mean that term broadly speaking, is to scream into the wind. It is to shovel sand against the tide. It is to know that your voice might be drowned out, your work might feel endless and futile, but that it matters. To engage in the work is to have faith. Faith, the theme of May. It takes great faith in the power of our interconnected web. It takes great faith to remember that all great systems have been brought down by big ideas that started in small, tiny circles. All oppressive and interlocking systems of injustice will go on forever, grinding on in perpetuity without the faithful, our faithful commitment to carry the flame, to keep the spark alive. When it feels that you are screaming into the wind and shoveling against the tide, when it feels that you are all alone and no one sees the injustice the way you do, know that there are hundreds, if not thousands of UUs calling out their support from beyond the grave. These forerunners of ours, you can put faith in them and you can call on them for courage. our contemporaries like Scott Warren and the Linda Lindas. You can amplify their voices and their causes. You can listen with intention, and remember, it takes guts to fight a system so much bigger than yourself. It takes faith to stand in your truth. It takes faith to know that there have always been people with moral clarity. And it takes faith to know that your actions, your life, your deeds matter. Faith that you are not alone in your conviction, even if it feels that way. This is the legacy we inherit, and the legacy we work to keep inheriting each and every day. May it be so, and amen.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abby just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.